Penguin Audio presents Tried by War, Abraham Lincoln as Commander-in-Chief by James M. McPherson, read by George Guidall and directed by Matt Wilson.
Preface. Abraham Lincoln was the only president in American history whose entire administration was bounded by war. On the day he took office, the first document placed on his desk was a letter from Major Robert Anderson at Fort Sumter, informing him that the garrison there must be withdrawn or resupplied at the risk of war. Lincoln chose to take that risk. 4 years later he was assassinated, 5 days after General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox, but while several Confederate armies were still in the field. During those 4 years, military matters required more of Lincoln's time and energy than anything else. He spent more time in the War Department telegraph office sending and receiving messages to and from his generals than anywhere else except the White House or his summer residence in the soldiers' home at the northern edge of Washington. The president rarely left Washington except to visit the Army of the Potomac at the front, which he did 11 times for a total of 42 days. Not only Lincoln's success or failure as president, but also the very survival of the United States depended on how he performed his duties as commander-in-chief. In the vast literature on our 16th president, however, the amount of attention devoted to his role as commander-in-chief is disproportionately far smaller than the actual percentage of time he spent on that task. On the 175th anniversary of Lincoln's birth in 1984, Gettysburg College hosted a conference on recent Lincoln scholarship. There were 3 sessions on psychobiography, 2 on the assassination, 2 on Lincoln's image in photographs and popular prints, and 1 each on his economic ideas, humor, Indian policy, and slavery. But there were no sessions on Lincoln as commander-in-chief, a remarkable irony, given the site of the conference. Of the 17 collected essays on Lincoln published in 1987 by the late Don E. Fehrenbacher, one of the foremost Lincoln scholars of his time, not one dealt with the president as a military leader. In 1994, the historian Merrill Peterson published a splendid book on Lincoln's image in History and Memory. There are chapters on Lincoln and the South, religion, politics, Reconstruction, civil rights, and several other themes, but no chapter on Lincoln and the Army. Perhaps it is time to recognize the truth expressed by Lincoln himself in his second inaugural address, when the Civil War had been raging for almost 4 years. On the progress of our arms, all else chiefly depends. All else included many of the questions and developments that historians consider important: the fate of slavery, the definition of freedom, the destruction of the Old South's socio-economic system, and the triumph of entrepreneurial free labor capitalism as the national norm, a new definition of American nationalism, the origins of a new system of race relations, the very survival of the United States in a manner that laid the foundations for the nation's emergence as a world power. It was the commander-in-chief who was held mainly responsible for the progress of our arms, or the lack thereof. This book offers a narrative and analysis of how and how well Lincoln met this challenge, which was unquestionably the chief challenge of his life and of the life of the nation. Introduction. On July 27, 1848, a tall, raw-boned Whig congressman from Illinois rose in the House of Representatives to challenge the Mexican war policies of President James K. Polk. An opponent of what he considered an unjust war, Abraham Lincoln mocked his own meager record as a militia captain who saw no action in the Black Hawk War of 1832. "By the way, Mr. Speaker, did you know I am a military hero?" said Lincoln. "Yes, sir. I fought, bled, and came away after charges upon the wild onions and a good many struggles with the mosquitoes." Lincoln might not have indulged his famous sense of humor in this fashion if he had known that 13 years later he would become commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army in a war that turned out to be 47 times more lethal for American soldiers than the Mexican War.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?